I do believe that we all have a sense that we're here to do something in our lives. And as spiritual seekers, I think that we all like to be able to hear the voice of God for anything, any guidance that we want. And I'm sure a lot of us would think, we wish that it would be as simple as picking up your phone and dialing God. I actually heard that somebody tried something like this. He called the spiritual leader of Tibet, and he sent them this large goat with this long neck. It turns out he had dialed Dalai Lama. I know we all love to be able to hear the voice for God for ourselves and everything that we're doing from day to day. It could be something as simple as what time to get up or what am I going to wear for the day, to something, I guess, what we would think is more important, like our purpose in life, what we're to be doing in our world. But we do need to remember that when we're asking God, we should not be asking God to do our will. We need to be asking God to let us hear His or her will for us. To parallel a thought in A Course in Miracles, the will of God is our will, and our will is the will of God. Our Unity co-founder, Charles Fillmore, in his Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, tells us that the power of will is the ability to choose, to decide, to command, to direct, and determine. So we're constantly choosing and directing our lives for the better, hopefully. And we can do this unconsciously and maybe go through some hard times while doing it. Or we could do it consciously by going and aligning our thoughts with God. So even if we think we know what we want and we're not really following God's will, we could run into some heartaches and headaches along the way. And I'm sure, I'm going to say most of us have had those moments where we want to force something in our lives because we think that's what we're supposed to be doing or that's what's supposed to be happening for us. So if we want to go with the flow of life, we want to align our thoughts, align our mind with the divine, with God. We want to connect to that divinity so we can hear the voice of God for ourselves, for what we need to be doing. Emily Cady, in her book, Lessons in Truth, says that the human faculty of will is God tugging at our heart for what is good. I'll repeat that. The human faculty of will is God tugging at our heart for what is good. She goes on to say that while the intellect seeks truth, will seeks the good. Further, at a human level, just as intellect seeks truth by means of philosophy, will attempts to attain the good through metaphysics, meaning beyond the physical. And also according to philosopher and theologian Thomas Aquinas, just as the perfection of intellect is wisdom, the will is perfected in love. I'll say that again. Just as the perfection of intellect is wisdom, the will is perfected as love. And as with wisdom, love is not found by metaphysics, but by mysticism. And that just means that you want to go into prayer and contemplation to get that divine guidance for yourself. So the true will then is that love as being perfected. Therefore, if we practice doing the will of love, we are really doing the will of God. Our true will then is choosing and deciding what to do for ourselves after going within and aligning our thoughts and our feelings with God. Now, how do we go about doing this? I'm glad you asked. We read in the Bible that Elijah meets God at the Mount of Horeb. And this gives us an idea of how to listen to God. And I'll explain. In 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 11 through 12, and this is from the New Revised Standard Version, we read that God said to Elijah, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. God tells Elijah to go stand on the mountain, which according to the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary from Charles Fillmore, it means that it is a high plane of consciousness, a spiritual realization. So we read, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." What does this mean? It means that to experience hearing the voice of God, we want to go on that high plane of consciousness. We want to get into the habit of going into a time of prayer and meditation daily. And as we do that, we know that with that habit, you start getting more aligned with divine thought. And as you do anything that you choose, it tends to kind of lead you in a better direction and maybe even flow easier for you in your life. So while in this high place of consciousness, Elijah experiences the disturbance of mountain-splitting, rock-breaking winds. We read, "Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord." Of course, whether we're practicing or not, aligning our thoughts with God, we could still experience those disturbances in our lives, especially when we first commit to align our thoughts with God. We just might get those mountain-splitting, rock-breaking winds, those disturbances. And that's just because we are getting out of our comfort zone. And we need to remember at that point to commit to stay with it, to stay with our daily practice, so that we can consciously and constantly keep aligning our thoughts, our senses with God, so we can flow through our lives a little better. Of course, we must remember also that even though we're doing this, we'll know that we need to keep realizing that in the story tells us that, yes, the Lord was not in the wind, not in the disturbances. And we also read, after the wind, an earthquake. Metaphysically, an earthquake stands for agitation and commotion in our daily lives. And I'm sure we've experienced a little earthquake here and there from time to time. The Lord was not in the earthquake. So when we get agitated and things are not going quite right in our daily lives, we need to remember to keep that commitment, to go within. No matter what's happening from day to day, get up that next morning, do a little prayer, a little meditation, and maybe even right before you go to sleep, a little prayer, meditation. Ask for guidance and listen for that voice. And of course, we read that Elijah also experiences a fire. And after the earthquake, a fire. According to our Unity co-founder, Charles Fillmore, in his Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, fire means cleansing and purification. Therefore, after this cleansing and purification, Elijah hears the sound of sheer silence. He hears the voice of God. We also know that fire represents the positive affirmative state of mind as opposed to the negative or watery state. So while in this spiritual state of realization, it does not matter what kind of disturbances, what kind of earthquakes we're having, you just might find that in the middle of all that, you might still be able to hear the voice of God. In simple terms, this is letting us know that no matter what happens in our lives, let's keep the high watch. Let's keep focusing our inner guidance, our aligning our thoughts and minds with God so we can move through life a little easier, I'm going to say. So to reiterate, get yourself up on the mountain to a high state of consciousness. And yes, you may experience those disturbances. And also, we might actually experience that fire, but that fire is actually a cleansing, which means removing those negative thoughts that we have so that we can be clear in heart, clear in mind to hear the voice of God for ourselves. When I heard the calling to become a spiritual leader and to go into the ministerial school to become a Unity minister, you can say that I was guided to go stand on the mountain. And yes, at first, it was actually somewhat easy for me to be able to get into the Unity Urban Ministerial School, which is where I went to school for Unity. And even though this went easy and I started doing it, I was fully committed to it, you could say that I experienced those mountain-splitting, rock-breaking winds when not only did I have a full-time job, I was a full-time husband, and I had 2 girls that I had to help raise. So no matter what I did, I started falling behind. And on top of that, even though I kept doing what I needed to do, you could say that I experienced a couple of earthquakes along the way, so much so that I was considering quitting. But something told me to keep going. And something, which is this voice of God, told me exactly what to do. And I realized that I was taking a little too much on. So I cut back on my classes, and I was able to get back on track. And then I was able to finish, get ordained, and to be able to be given the message of unity to anybody that's willing to listen. I don't know a whole lot about what's been going on with the church here, Unity of Melbourne, but I'm sure that all the time that you've been here in this locale, you've been standing on the mountain. And things have started to happen, and I'm sure COVID didn't help anything. And you could say that those were your winds, that were your disturbances. And then you had, of course, along the way, losing people, gaining people, losing the senior minister you had a few years ago. So all that, you could think of it as an earthquake. But I can see that you have kept a high watch. And all that fire has been cleansing you now. And I understand that you're in the process of moving to a new location. So think of it as this transition that you're going through, that fire that's cleansing you, that's cleansing everything, getting rid of all the negative thoughts that you might have about why do we have to move, or why is this happening. and start thinking about what's coming for you next, because that is the guidance of God pushing you forward to do better, to be better. So if you like to listen for and hear the voice of God for yourself, yes, you might try dialing a llama, or you can do what Elijah did and listening to God. And we hear from 1 Kings chapter 19 that you can go stand on the mountain, go to that high plane of consciousness, and yes, let the mountain splitting, rock breaking winds come and go, and let any commotions pass you by as well, any earthquakes, while remembering to stay committed to your purpose, to what you're here for. And yes, welcome the fire. So that fire will cleanse you, will get rid of any negative thoughts, and you can move forward. And of course, as our fifth unity principle, do take action. We know that our fifth principle is not enough to know what to do. You must take action.